Simon Cowell had seen it all. After 2 decades of judging, his instincts were razor sharp. He could spot authenticity within seconds. But when David Mitchell and Emma Stevens walked onto the Got Talent stage that Thursday evening in Manchester, something made him pause. David was 32, moving with careful precision, one hand on a white cane, the other holding Emma's arm. Emma was 29, her movements slightly uncoordinated, her hands trembling faintly. The audience applauded politely, uncertainty in the air. The host approached with a microphone. "Welcome to Britain's Got Talent. Tell us your names and a bit about yourselves." David spoke first. His voice was clear and confident, compensating for what his eyes couldn't see. "I'm David Mitchell. I've been blind since birth, and this is Emma Stevens, my fiancée." Emma leaned toward the microphone, but when she spoke, her words came out slightly slurred, the consonants soft, the rhythm uneven, the result of cerebral palsy that affected her motor control. "We've been together for 4 years," she said carefully, "and we want to sing for you today." At the judges' table, Simon exchanged glances with the other judges. One of them leaned forward. "David, how will you perform without being able to see?" David smiled. "I've memorized over 200 songs. Every note, every chord. I don't need to see music. I've lived inside it my entire life." Simon's expression shifted slightly. That answer had weight. "And Emma, will you be able to sing comfortably?" Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone. "I'll try my best," she whispered. The audience murmured sympathetically. Simon leaned back, arms crossed. He wasn't convinced, but he was willing to listen. A stagehand brought out a keyboard. David moved toward it with practiced confidence, his hands finding the keys. Emma stood beside him, tense with fear. "Whenever you're ready," the host said. David's fingers found middle C. He took a breath, and then he began to play. The opening notes were soft, delicate. His hands moved with absolute precision. This wasn't a blind man fumbling. This was a musician who had transcended his disability completely. Emma lifted the microphone. Her hand shook, and then she began to sing. Her voice emerged fragile at first, words slightly imprecise, but there was something underneath, something raw and honest. She sang about love that doesn't give up, about finding light in darkness. The audience fell into captivated silence. Simon's arms slowly uncrossed. This was real. David's piano playing grew more complex. He played without sheet music, without sight, with only the music inside his mind. Emma's voice, despite its imperfections, began to soar. The tremor in her hands remained, but the emotion was undeniable. They reached the chorus, and Emma's voice strengthened. She wasn't singing to impress anymore. She was singing because this was where her disability couldn't touch her. David played a brief interlude, fingers flying across the keys. The audience gasped. This was extraordinary. Emma came back for the second verse, her voice transformed. The fragility was gone. What remained was power, clarity, and impossible purity. Simon leaned forward, completely absorbed. But then, midway through the second verse, disaster struck. Emma's tremor intensified suddenly. The microphone slipped from her shaking fingers and hit the stage floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the theater. The feedback screech was immediate and painful. Emma froze. Her face flushed red with humiliation. David, unable to see what had happened, continued playing for a few more measures before realizing something was wrong. His hands stilled on the keys. The audience held its breath. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I can't. I can't do this." She turned to walk off stage, her movements jerky with distress and embarrassment. David called out her name, confusion and concern in his voice, but she was already moving away. Simon Cowell stood up. Not slowly, not with hesitation. He stood up with the kind of immediacy that shocked everyone in the theater, including the other judges. Without a word, he walked around the judges' table and headed straight for the stage. The host started to intervene, but Simon held up a hand. The cameras followed him as he crossed the distance between judgment and compassion. He reached Emma just as she was about to descend the stage stairs. He picked up the fallen microphone, tested it quickly, and then did something that 20 years of television had never prepared anyone for. He knelt down. Not to her level, because she was standing, but in a gesture of respect, of recognition. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Look at me." She turned, tears streaming down her face, mortified beyond words. "Your voice doesn't need to be perfect," Simon said, and everyone in the theater heard him. "It needs to be real, and yours is the most real thing I've ever heard on this stage." He held out the microphone to her. "Your hands shake. So what? Your words aren't always clear. So what? What I just heard, what everyone in this theater just heard, was a voice that could move mountains. Do you understand me?" Emma stared at him, unable to speak. Simon stood and looked at David, still sitting at the keyboard, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "David," Simon called out, "your fiancé needs you to play. Can you do that?" David's expression shifted to understanding. His hands returned to the keys, finding their positions automatically. Simon turned back to Emma. "One more time, from wherever you stopped, and I promise you, nobody in this room is judging your tremor or your speech. We're listening to your soul. Show us what that sounds like." He placed the microphone in her hands and walked back to the judges' table. But he didn't sit down. He stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. The theater was absolutely silent. 2,000 people holding their collective breath. Emma looked at David. David, though he couldn't see her, turned his face toward her voice and nodded. "Together," he said simply. David began playing again. The same song, the same opening, but somehow it felt different now. More urgent, more important. Emma lifted the microphone. Her hands still trembled. But this time she didn't fight it. She accepted it as part of who she was, and when she opened her mouth to sing, what emerged was transcendent. Her voice filled every corner of the massive theater, clear, powerful, achingly beautiful. She sang about overcoming, about refusing to be broken, about love that sees past every limitation. And David's piano supported her like a foundation of pure music, his blind fingers creating cascades of sound that seemed impossible without sight. The audience began to react, not with polite applause, but with visible emotion. People in the front rows were crying. Others had their hands clasped over their hearts. The other judges at the table had stopped pretending to be professional. They were simply watching, transfixed. Emma and David reached the final chorus, and they didn't just sing and play it. They inhabited it. They became it. Emma's voice soared to notes that defied her disability. David's playing became so complex, so layered, so emotionally rich, that it was clear he wasn't just a blind pianist. He was a musician who had spent 32 years turning darkness into light through sound. The final note rang out. Emma held it, her voice unwavering, pure and strong. David's hands came to rest on the keys in a soft, perfect chord. Silence. and then the theater exploded. 2,000 people rose to their feet as one. The standing ovation was instantaneous, thunderous, uncontainable. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering, crying, shouting. The other judges were on their feet, applauding with genuine amazement. But Simon Cowell did something else. He walked back onto the stage, straight to the golden buzzer, and without saying a word, he slammed his hand down on it. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling. The iconic music blared. The lights turned gold. Emma collapsed into David's arms, sobbing. David held her, his own face wet with tears he couldn't hide. Simon approached them as the celebration continued around them. He waited until Emma and David separated slightly, then spoke directly to them, his voice rough with emotion that he didn't bother to hide. "I've judged thousands of performances," he said. "I've heard technically perfect singers, musicians who could play anything. But what you just did, that wasn't about technical perfection. That was about proving that the human spirit has no limits. None." He looked at Emma. "Your voice is extraordinary, not despite your challenges. It's extraordinary because you refuse to let those challenges define you." He turned to David. "And you don't play the piano. You speak through it. That's not talent. That's artistry." The audience's ovation continued, wave after wave of appreciation that seemed like it would never end. Emma and David held each other at center stage, surrounded by falling golden confetti, bathed in light, and for the first time in their lives, celebrated not with sympathy, but with genuine awe. Later, after the cameras stopped rolling, Simon stayed. He spoke with Emma and David for nearly 30 minutes about their lives, struggles, and dreams. When they finally left, they carried more than a golden buzzer. They had validation, recognition, proof that they were right to believe in themselves. The episode became the most watched Got Talent audition in history. But more than that, it changed how people saw disability. Not as a limitation, but as a different way of experiencing the world. And sometimes, that perspective could create something more beautiful than perfection. Because that night, David and Emma proved that the only real disability is the inability to see the extraordinary in what others call ordinary. And Simon Cowell learned that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is believe in someone when they're struggling to believe in themselves. That's not just television. That's humanity at its finest.